The story taught in textbooks often resembles a carefully crafted set design, concealing the traces of a civilization whose capabilities extend far beyond the official timeline. We have been conditioned to believe that the majestic cathedrals and intricate mechanisms of the past were merely the products of religious enthusiasts wielding rudimentary tools. However, upon closer engineering analysis, this picture crumbles, revealing a chilling truth about technologies that we are forbidden to name. There exists a global myth that the people of the medieval era, whose lives were extremely brief and filled with hardships, possessed the knowledge and tools to create devices with precision surpassing that of modern Swiss timepieces. Illiterate craftsmen in dirty aprons supposedly managed to calculate the movements of celestial bodies with an accuracy of fractions of a second for centuries ahead. But if we cast aside imposed templates and engage our logic, it becomes clear. We are dealing not with art, but with complex analog computing machines, remnants of a culture that was nearly wiped from the face of the earth. Official science meticulously guards the secret of the gigantic mechanical structures in Prague and Strasbourg, referring to them as mere clocks. Yet these are not just instruments for measuring time. They are genuine metal computers embedded in towers that survived a global cataclysm. We are led to believe that, for instance, the Prague astronomical clock was created in 1410, during a time when Europe, according to historians, was in a state of deep decline and ignorance. It is hard to imagine how, amidst the general chaos, a mechanism suddenly appears, consisting of hundreds of gears of microscopic precision. To create such a part that would function in conjunction with many others for decades without jamming requires a high-precision lathe and a deep understanding of kinematics. A craftsman of that era would need quality alloyed steel, not raw iron hammered by hand. The internal mechanisms of such structures shock with their lack of evidence of manual processing or filing. It appears as though they were produced through machine stamping and tooth-cutting with mathematical precision. Any engineer would confirm that creating a device of this level necessitates a colossal industrial base, including ore extraction, a chemical industry for producing lubricants, and a serious mathematical school for calculating elliptical orbits. The official narrative of genius loners working by candlelight is a convenient legend that conceals the impossibility of replicating such masterpieces with primitive means. The astronomical mechanisms of Strasbourg demonstrate not just time, but the precession of the Earth's axis and the positions of planets that, according to official chronology, had not even been studied in those centuries. Copernicus published his works long after these devices were already showcasing complex celestial mechanics. Without the use of optical telescopes, such calculations are physically impossible. Why would an ordinary person of that time need to know the phases of eclipses a century ahead, or the position of the moon in the zodiac signs down to the minute? The answer lies in the different purpose of these machines. They did not serve the people but functioned as control panels or countdown timers, marking cycles of catastrophes and resets that humanity was forced to forget. Those who inhabited the ruins of the old world struggled for a long time to understand how to use these gadgets of the past. For centuries, they attempted to decipher the workings of these gigantic processors, labeling it magic, and then concocted tales of blinded masters to justify their own powerlessness in the face of lost technologies. We stand before the fact of a grand forgery, where metal that has survived centuries holds knowledge of the cosmos that we have barely dreamed of. The figures evoking the finitude of existence on these towers are not mere allegories, but cold mechanical warnings, continuing their countdown even now. Next, we will explore the specific technical details that prove the impossibility of creating these mechanisms within the specified dates. As we begin to dissect the workings of these colossal mechanisms through the lens of a modern engineer, the official historical narrative crumbles almost instantly. The notion that such devices are merely the product of solitary individuals wielding files is a profound misconception that fails under even the most basic technical scrutiny. We encounter metalworking technologies that simply could not have existed in the eras claimed. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence lies in the flawless geometry of the gears. For a mechanism to operate smoothly, without jamming, and to endure for centuries, the teeth of the gears must possess an involute profile, a complex geometric curve. Calculating this requires a mastery of advanced mathematics and differential calculus. Officially, this type of gearing was only described in the 18th century, yet ancient components from Prague and Strasbourg exhibit impeccable adherence to this formula, which supposedly was discovered 300 years after their creation. Crafting such a profile by eye is impossible. It necessitates dividing heads and milling machines with micron-level precision. Moreover, macro photographs of the internal components reveal a complete absence of any signs of manual labor. There isn't a single scratch from a file. Instead, we see perfect machine stamping and cutting, characteristic of high-speed factory processing. This clearly indicates that these mechanisms were not constructed in a cottage industry, but emerged from the walls of industrial workshops. The materials from which these parts are made raise even more questions. In the Middle Ages, metal smelting was a gamble, often resulting in raw iron filled with impurities, slag, and air bubbles. Such components would quickly break and wear out, yet the gears of these towers function reliably for centuries. Analyzing the alloys often reveals astonishing purity and uniformity in structure, a quality that today can only be achieved through vacuum melting or electrolysis. All of this leads us to the conclusion of a colossal industrial infrastructure that official history has simply erased. Producing high-alloy steel and brass of such purity requires massive factories, mined resources, chemical laboratories for creating fluxes, and stable energy sources. Yet we find no tailings of waste rock or foundations of these factories. Either they were deliberately concealed or destroyed, along with the civilization that possessed capabilities far exceeding those of any village, even the most devout. These mechanisms are not mere creative bursts of craftsmanship, but programmable devices. The algorithms embedded within them take into account the most complex solar and lunar cycles, transforming a heap of metal into a genuine analog computer. The creators of these machines clearly operated with a database of astronomical observations accumulated over tens of thousands of years, which does not align with the image of monks who lacked even primitive telescopes. Do you want to know what specific astronomical data is hidden within these mechanical calculations and why it baffles modern scientists? When we peer behind the facade of these mechanisms, it becomes clear that we're not just looking at timekeepers. We're facing intricate analog computers operating with data that, in the official Middle Ages, would have been deemed magic or heresy. The astronomical clocks of Prague and Strasbourg showcase knowledge of the cosmos that extends far beyond the lifespan of any individual or even entire dynasties. It's astonishing that these devices simultaneously track multiple types of time: Babylonian, Old Czech, and the modern civil time we recognize today. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The true power of these computational machines is directed skyward. With incredible precision, they display the positions of the sun and moon within the zodiac, the phases of the lunar cycle, and the timing of eclipses. To calculate such cycles would require centuries of continuous astronomical observations, which, according to history books, simply did not exist at that time. The creators had neither telescopes nor satellites nor electronic databases, yet they embedded in metal information that we now gather using orbital observatories. Researchers are particularly perplexed by the presence of indicators of precession, the slow shift of the Earth's rotational axis, in the calendars of these clocks. A complete cycle of precession takes about 26,000 years. How could a civilization that has officially existed for only a few centuries not only be aware of this phenomenon, but also create gears capable of reflecting this rhythm. This requires a mathematical framework that was only made accessible during the Enlightenment. Moreover, some elements of the astrolabes on these clocks are calibrated as if they're reading the sky not from 15th century Europe, but from some other point or even time altogether. It seems these instruments were designed for a global monitoring of the planet's state on a solar system scale. Why would an ordinary city dweller or peasant need to know the position of the apogee of the lunar orbit? The answer is simple. This information was vital for those who understood the cyclical nature of terrestrial disasters. These towers served as a kind of navigational instruments, marking the stability of the Earth's axis. But if the clocks are instruments, the urban environment surrounding them raises even more questions. Looking at the scale of these structures, we inevitably encounter a demographic paradox that challenges the existence of those who are presented to us as the builders of these metropolises. We tend to think of past cities as overcrowded, but the mathematics tell a different story. How could small groups of people erect and maintain such technological marvels? This question will lead us further as we analyze the strange discrepancy between architectural grandeur and the actual resources of the population. The scale of the architectural heritage into which these mechanisms are integrated creates an insurmountable contradiction with the official population figures of the time. When we gaze upon the grand cathedrals of Prague or Strasbourg, we see structures designed to accommodate tens of thousands of people simultaneously. Yet, if we delve into demographic records, we discover that during the periods of their supposed construction, the total population of these cities barely reached 20 to 30,000 residents, including the elderly and children. This presents a logical conundrum. Why would a tiny settlement, by modern standards, construct a building that could house its entire population twice over? The mathematics of construction is even more unforgiving. The extraction, processing, and transportation of thousands of tons of stone, the erection of vaults soaring to 50 meters, and the installation of intricate spires require thousands of highly skilled workers, masons, engineers, architects, and logisticians. In the declared medieval era, where the majority of people were occupied with survival and agriculture, allocating such a colossal human resource for decades ahead would have been physically impossible. The city of that time would simply have starved if every able-bodied man had left for the construction of the century. Moreover, the structure of these cities does not appear to be the result of gradual growth, but rather the legacy of a highly organized system designed for entirely different purposes. The broad avenues, complex drainage systems, and the towers with their computational mechanisms suggest that the medieval inhabitants were not builders, but rather new colonists who settled in already constructed, yet abandoned metropolises. They utilized the ground floors of buildings, while the vast halls and complex engineering communications remained excessive and incomprehensible to them. This gap between the population's capabilities and the reality of stone and metal prompts thoughts of a global replacement. Official history persistently attributes these achievements to those who came later, obscuring the existence of predecessors. These predecessors possessed not only knowledge in mechanics, but also a social organization that allowed for the construction of planetary-scale objects. But where did this civilization go? The answer lies buried beneath layers of soil and strange transformations in the very appearance of cities that have literally sunk into the ground. The traces of this abrupt halt and the subsequent attempts to adapt the great heritage to the needs of the survivors are visible everywhere. If one closely examines the foundations and ground floors of those very buildings where the clocks are installed, a picture emerges that cannot be explained by natural soil settling over several centuries. Let's remember this. What physical evidence points to the fact that these metropolises were literally buried under layers of soil? And how is this connected to the sudden disappearance of the true builders? As we delve deeper into the architectural foundations that support these grand mechanisms, an anomaly catches our eye. one that official science prefers to label as the cultural layer. Across Europe, particularly in cities like Prague and Strasbourg, a startling pattern emerges. The ground floors of magnificent buildings lie buried deep underground. Windows transformed into semi-basement niches, doors leading into the earth, and full facades sinking 3 to 4 meters down are not merely the result of gradual dust accumulation. Mathematically, it's impossible for the ground level to have risen so high over 500 years due to human activity, especially when those people weren't producing plastics or industrial waste. What we see are clear signs of a massive inundation or a mudflow that literally buried the cities of a past civilization beneath layers of clay and sand. This global reset erased most evidence of a high-tech history, leaving only the tips of the iceberg visible, those very towers and cathedrals. This explains why the mechanisms of the clocks are positioned so high. They survived only because they were above the level of that destructive wave. Those who arrived in these cities later didn't build them from scratch. They excavated, trying to adapt the remnants of grandeur to their primitive needs. The traces of this cataclysm are evident in the very materials of the buildings. We find melted stone and bricks transformed into a glass-like substance, indicating exposure to colossal temperatures or powerful energy discharges. In some parts of Prague, the old masonry appears as if a giant thermal tool has passed over it. This is not the aftermath of a candle or torch fire. It's the result of a planetary-scale event that turned thriving metropolises into ruins buried in mud. In this context, the purpose of the astronomical computers on the towers takes on a sinister meaning. They do more than tell time. They were installed as checkpoints to monitor the planet's stability. But after the catastrophe, something went awry. The world we know is a post-world, built on the remnants of a past that we can barely comprehend. Strangely, the surviving mechanisms began to behave as if the very reality around them had shifted. They display cycles that no longer align with what we observe in the sky today. If the clocks were designed as perfect instruments, why do they now seem complex and incomprehensible to us? The answer lies not in the mechanics of the devices, but in the very position of our planet in space. These hands, continuing their movement, capture a truth that is carefully concealed from us. The Earth has undergone a physical shift, and our doomsday clocks are the only link we have to the true sky that our ancestors witnessed before their world disappeared beneath a curtain of clay. But what exactly do they indicate now, and why do their readings make the modern elite so anxious? We are approaching a moment when mechanical truth clashes with our current astronomy. Modern restorers and historians often encounter an inexplicable phenomenon. Ancient astronomical mechanisms, despite their impeccable condition, constantly require adjustments. Official science attributes this to the imperfections of ancient technologies or the natural wear of metal, but engineering logic suggests otherwise. If a mechanism crafted with mathematical precision begins to deviate from reality, it doesn't mean the device is broken. It means that the external parameters for which it was calibrated have changed. These clocks lie only because they continue to faithfully reflect the rhythms of that old world that existed before a global shift. There is a well-founded hypothesis that the gigantic computing machines of Prague and Strasbourg were rigidly calibrated to a different position of the Earth in space. The astrolabes and zodiac disks on these towers capture a sky where the tilt of the Earth's axis was different, and the length of the year and days may have varied slightly but critically from today's measurements. We call them astronomical clocks, but in reality, they are benchmarks of system stability. If today the hand indicating the position of the Sun is misaligned by several degrees from the actual celestial body, it serves as direct evidence that our planet has experienced a physical tumble or a sudden shift of the poles. This shift in reality explains why medieval maps so often do not align with modern coordinates and why constellations are depicted differently in ancient engravings. Those who restored these mechanisms after the clay flood faced a chilling truth. The sky above them no longer corresponded with the instruments of their ancestors. Instead of acknowledging the fact of a global catastrophe, the new rulers preferred to declare old knowledge as erroneous or allegorical, transforming the mechanisms into complex toys for entertaining the masses. However, the inner workings of these machines cannot be deceived. Within the depths of cathedrals, gears continue to turn, counting the cycles of precession and century-long rhythms that modern civilization overlooks. These mechanisms are silent witnesses to the instability of our world. They were created as early warning systems, tuned to resonate with cosmic processes. When reality shifted, the clocks became a living reproach to the new chronology. Behind the facade of moving figures of apostles and angels lies the cold calculation of catastrophe. It is extremely beneficial for contemporary authorities to maintain the myth that everything is proceeding as it should, and that the sky above us has always been the same. For if one accepts that the clocks reveal the truth about the shifting axis, one must also acknowledge that such events are cyclical. This leads us to the most guarded secret, the true purpose of these timers. Why hide from people the information that the reset time is already near? The answer lies in the final part of this grand mechanical conspiracy, where a skeleton striking a bell ceases to be just an ornament and becomes a harbinger of the inevitable. How exactly do the elites use this knowledge today? And what does the final cycle embedded in the depths of the Prague Tower truly portend? We are approaching a climax that could change our perspective on the entire future. The story has transformed into a tool of control, where knowledge of the true past is replaced by a convenient narrative that keeps humanity in a state of eternal slumber. The official timeline carefully sidesteps the question, why invest colossal resources in creating devices whose functions are excessive for everyday life? The answer is chillingly simple. These mechanisms are not mere decorations for cities. They are instruments of planetary monitoring, counting down to the next great reset. The skeleton that pulls the bell rope on the Prague Tower every hour is not a moral lesson about the brevity of human existence. It is a technical metaphor for the end of the current cycle, a warning that the system's time is running out. The true purpose of these timers is to document the cyclical nature of disasters. Those who govern the world today are well aware that our linear view of progress is an illusion. We exist in a gap between global catastrophes, and the clocks in Prague or Strasbourg were left to us as a legacy from a previous civilization that understood. Disaster is both inevitable and predictable. For the modern elite, concealing this information is a matter of survival for the system. After all, if people realize that the world is on the brink of another physical shift or solar activity capable of erasing digital civilization, the entire structure of taxes, credits, and social obligations would collapse in an instant. Chaos would become uncontrollable if the timer were visible to all. This is precisely why we are made to believe in solitary craftsmen and primitive tools of the past. We are convinced that we are the pinnacle of evolution, when in reality we are merely temporary inhabitants in the mud-covered ruins of a great empire. The Doomsday Clock continues its relentless ticking, and its gears, crafted with an accuracy beyond our reach, inexorably approach a critical mark. We have forgotten how to read the instructions left in metal, mistaking complex calculations for medieval astrology. But metal knows no politics and cannot lie. It simply records the movement of celestial bodies and the tilt of the axis, which will eventually return to its starting point. When the hands of these giant processors reach their final position, the scenery of history will shift once again. Those who study old maps without ice caps at the poles and notice windows that have sunk into the ground understand the warning has already sounded. We are in the final chapter of the current cycle. We have been left with the keys to understanding reality, and our task is to awaken before the mechanism completes its last turn. Time is not a straight line, but a circle, and the bell that the mechanical figure strikes tolls for a world that has once again refused to believe its own eyes.
Subscribe, because what comes next is something you've never heard before.